Hello, travelers. Shall we explore medieval stories tonight?
Tonight I thought we'd talk about life as an Egyptian concubine. Where are you in the world right now, and what time is it there? Let me know in the comments. It's wonderful to know where our fellow travelers are joining us from tonight. What would you do if your life was suddenly, irrevocably not your own? Imagine waking up one morning and finding yourself not in your familiar bed, but in a place so alien, so different, that it felt like another planet. This was the reality for many women who found themselves within the walls of an Egyptian harem, though perhaps without the planet comparison, spaceships being a bit beyond their Bronze Age tech, wouldn't you say? The women who became concubines in ancient Egypt came from vastly different backgrounds. Some were foreign princesses, captured during war and offered as tribute to the pharaoh. Think of it as an ancient version of a corporate merger, only instead of stocks and bonds, the currency was beautiful women. Others were daughters of impoverished families, sold into service to alleviate their families' burdens. It was a harsh reality, a heartbreaking choice, a bit like selling your prized vintage comic book collection to pay the rent, but with much higher stakes. Still others were chosen for their beauty and skills, their potential recognized by those who sought to enhance the royal or noble household. Chosen being a polite term, of course. Now that we've covered the origins, let's talk about the transition. The initial entry into the royal or noble household was a profound shock, a cultural and personal earthquake. Imagine going from a quiet village life to the bustling, opulent world of the palace. The languages, customs, and expectations were all different. It was like being dropped into a foreign country without a phrasebook or a translator. Or GPS, of course, since satellites were also conspicuously absent. The women had to learn new languages, new customs, and new ways of behaving. They were taught to dance, sing, and play musical instruments. They were instructed in the arts of seduction and diplomacy, skills that could be as valuable as any weapon. Picture charm school meets spy training, but with significantly more gold jewelry. The goal was to please their master, the pharaoh or nobleman, and to bear him healthy children, especially sons. Speaking of new skills, this brings us to the incredible cultural shift these women experienced. For many, their previous lives were simple, focused on survival and family. Suddenly, they were surrounded by luxury, but also by strict rules and constant scrutiny. It was like going from living off-grid to starring in a reality TV show, only with less privacy and a lot more pressure. The personal shifts were equally profound. These women had to leave behind their families, their friends, and their former identities. They had to adapt to a new world, forge new relationships, and find a way to survive in a complex and often dangerous environment. Imagine having to reinvent yourself overnight, like a social media influencer trying to stay relevant in a rapidly changing world. But what good is surviving without a little bit of joy? Despite the challenges, many concubines found ways to create meaningful lives within the harem. They formed friendships with other women, shared stories, and supported each other through difficult times. They used their skills and talents to gain influence and improve their status. Some even managed to become trusted advisors to the pharaoh or nobleman, wielding considerable power behind the scenes. It was like a secret society, a sisterhood forged in adversity, a bit like a book club that just happens to involve palace intrigue. From cultural shocks to personal reinventions, medieval life required constant adaptation. Key takeaway: life as a concubine was a complex mix of hardship and opportunity, requiring resilience, adaptability, and a little bit of cunning.
The silence of the night. It's a canvas, isn't it? A dark, velvety expanse where thoughts like stars begin to glimmer. Tonight, let's journey back, far back, to a world of sun-baked stones and the fragrant embrace of the Nile. Let's imagine ourselves within the walls of an Egyptian harem, not as observers, but as participants in its intricate dance. What if you woke each day not to the jarring clang of an alarm, but to the soft murmur of servants and the scent of jasmine blooming in a sun-drenched courtyard? Picture it, a life confined, yes, but also a life steeped in beauty, luxury, and the subtle currents of power. You might find yourself thinking, is this really so bad? My cat gets less pampering. Life within the harem wasn't a monotonous stretch of idle waiting. It was a carefully orchestrated routine, a symphony of beauty rituals, education, and strategic maneuvering. The day began long before sunrise, with ablutions in perfumed water, the application of kohl to darken the eyes, a look that could launch 1,000 ships, or at least catch the pharaoh's eye, and the meticulous arrangement of elaborate hairstyles. Imagine the dedication. We complain about spending 15 minutes on our hair. These women were styling pyramids on their heads. Education was key. Harem women weren't merely decorative. Many were highly intelligent and skilled. They received instruction in music, dance, poetry, and even statecraft. After all, a well-informed concubine could offer invaluable advice and insight to the pharaoh. Honey, I'm telling you, the Hyksos are underestimating our chariot technology. It was a cutthroat world, a constant competition for favor. The ability to play the harp beautifully or recite epic poems could be as valuable as physical beauty. The difference? Think of it as The Bachelor, but with calligraphy lessons and geopolitical strategy sessions thrown in for good measure. Now that we've dipped our toes into the daily rituals, let's immerse ourselves in the sensory environment of the harem. Imagine the architecture, soaring colonnades, intricately carved friezes, and lush gardens teeming with exotic plants and vibrant flowers. Think of the scents, frankincense and myrrh, mingling with the sweet fragrance of lotus blossoms and the earthy aroma of papyrus. Imagine the sounds, the gentle lapping of water in fountains, the melodious strains of a lute, and the hushed whispers of secrets shared among confidants. Sure, you might occasionally overhear some truly epic gossip, but that's just part of the package. But what good is beauty without context? The harem wasn't just a pretty prison. It was a microcosm of Egyptian society, a place where power dynamics played out in subtle but significant ways. The women within its walls weren't simply passive objects of desire. Many wielded considerable influence, acting as advisors, confidants, and even political players. Speaking of power,
This brings us to the intricate web of relationships within the harem. There were the senior wives, the mothers of the pharaoh's heirs, who enjoyed positions of considerable authority and respect. Then there were the younger concubines, vying for attention and favor. And then there were the eunuchs, the guardians of the harem, who occupied a unique and ambiguous position within the social hierarchy. All of this created tension. Imagine Mean Girls, but with strategically placed eyeliner and deadly snakes. Now that we've considered the social structure, let's talk about the food. Egyptian cuisine was surprisingly sophisticated, and the harem was no exception. Meals were elaborate affairs, featuring a wide variety of meats, fruits, vegetables, and breads, all seasoned with exotic spices. The only thing they didn't have was a decent pizza delivery service. Imagine feasting on roast duck with figs, grilled fish with herbs, and honey cakes drizzled with sesame oil. Forget midnight snacks of chips and dip. These women were indulging in culinary masterpieces. Modern comparison framework. Think of today's health retreats with yoga, mindfulness, and gourmet meals. But medieval people had the harem, an all-inclusive environment that aimed to relax the pharaoh. The difference was that one was a voluntary vacation and the other was a forced situation. When your alternative was endless field labor under the scorching sun, a life of relative luxury and leisure suddenly looked brilliant. Key takeaway. The harem was a world of beauty, power, and intrigue, a place where women navigated complex social dynamics and wielded influence in subtle but significant ways. As the night deepens and the moon casts long shadows across the room, consider the lives of these women. They were daughters, sisters, mothers, and wives. They were intelligent, ambitious, and resilient. They may have been confined within the walls of the harem, but their spirits remained free. And perhaps in the silence of this night we can hear their whispers, carried on the scent of jasmine and the murmur of the Nile.
The quiet of the harem, a deceptive silence, isn't it? If you've ever felt the tension in a room where unspoken words hang thick in the air, you have a tiny glimpse into the world within those walls. Within the gilded cages of Egyptian harems, relationships were a complex tapestry woven with threads of affection, ambition, and simmering resentment. Imagine being confined to a space with dozens, maybe hundreds of other women, all vying for the same thing, the pharaoh's favor. It's the ultimate office rivalry, but with much higher stakes. Hierarchies were rigidly defined. The great royal wife, the pharaoh's principal consort, held the highest position, wielding considerable influence. Below her were the secondary wives, then the concubines, ranked by seniority and, of course, the number of children they'd borne the pharaoh. Think of it as a pyramid scheme, but instead of selling essential oils, you're selling your charm. Alliances were forged and broken with dizzying speed. A friendly chat could be a genuine connection, or a calculated move to gain an advantage. Rivalries, fueled by jealousy and ambition, could be fierce, even deadly. Whispers carried weight, and a single rumor could ruin a woman's reputation. The eunuchs,
Castrated men who served as guardians and administrators within the harem played a crucial role. Often foreign-born, they were seen as trustworthy because theoretically they posed no threat to the pharaoh's lineage. They controlled access, mediated disputes, and oversaw the daily operations. Think of them as the HR department, but with significantly more power and a less appealing career path. Then there were the overseers, often women themselves, who were responsible for maintaining order and enforcing rules. These women held positions of authority and could be both allies and adversaries. But what good is all this palace intrigue without a little bit of genuine connection? Amidst the competition and power plays, genuine friendships could blossom. Sharing stories, offering comfort, and supporting each other through difficult times were essential for survival. These bonds, forged in shared experience and confinement, could be incredibly strong. Like sharing a knowing glance with a coworker during a particularly dreadful meeting, these women understood each other in a way no one else could. Now that we've navigated the treacherous waters of harem society, let's talk about the little things that made it bearable. The diversions. Life wasn't all politics. There was also weaving, music, dance, and storytelling. Imagine a book club, but instead of discussing the latest bestseller, you're swapping scandalous gossip about the royal court. Weaving in particular was a common pastime, offering both a creative outlet and a practical skill. Intricate tapestries depicting scenes from mythology or daily life were highly valued, and skilled weavers could earn significant prestige. Think of it as the ancient Egyptian answer to Etsy, but with less irony and more cats. Speaking of cats, this brings us to the comforts, however small. Personal adornment was another important aspect of life in the harem. Jewelry, cosmetics, and elaborate hairstyles were used to enhance beauty and express status. Think of it as the ancient Egyptian equivalent of Instagram filters, but instead of blurring your wrinkles, you're piling on the coal. Cosmetics were made from natural ingredients like minerals and plants, and were often applied with intricate tools and techniques. Elaborate hairstyles were a sign of status and were often adorned with jewels and ornaments. But what good are all the jewels without a little bit of gossip? The sharing of stories and folklore was a vital form of entertainment and cultural transmission. Myths, legends, and tales of gods and heroes were passed down through generations, providing a sense of identity and belonging. It was the ancient Egyptian equivalent of binge-watching Netflix, but instead of arguing about the latest plot twist, you're debating the true identity of Osiris. Oral tradition kept cultural heritage alive, and the bonds of shared experience often crossed classes. While relationships with the pharaoh were the goal, everyday companionship and support was critical. Key takeaway: the harem wasn't just a place of competition, it was a complex social ecosystem where women forged alliances and rivalries, found friendship, and created their own culture.
Now that we've explored the intricate social web and creative outlets within the harem, let's consider the broader context. Think of the harem as a microcosm of Egyptian society, reflecting the values, beliefs, and power structures of the time. Long before reality TV exploited human drama, the Egyptian harem provided a real-life stage for ambition, intrigue, and survival.
The difference was that the stakes were much higher, and the consequences could be far more severe. Sure, there wasn't a confessional booth or a dramatic rose ceremony, but the emotional intensity was arguably just as high. When your alternative was a life of drudgery and obscurity, the potential rewards of the harem suddenly looked very appealing. But what about the voices that history often silences? The experiences of the women who were not vying for the pharaoh's attention, the ones who found contentment in their friendships and creative pursuits. The quiet weavers, the skilled musicians, the storytellers who kept the culture alive. These were the women who quietly shaped the atmosphere of the harem, creating a sense of community and belonging amidst the political machinations. If you've ever found solace in a quiet corner, away from the spotlight, you can understand their perspective. Speaking of quiet corners, this brings us to the power dynamics. Power within the harem wasn't solely determined by proximity to the pharaoh. Skill, intelligence, and social savvy also played a role. A woman who was particularly skilled at weaving, for example, might earn the respect and admiration of her peers, and even gain influence within the harem. Think of it as the office worker who everyone goes to for advice, not because they're the boss, but because they're genuinely competent. Then there were the women who were adept at navigating the complex social dynamics, forging alliances, and manipulating events to their advantage. These women were the political strategists of the harem, and their influence could be considerable. But what good is all this power without a little bit of self-preservation? Maintaining one's position in the harem required constant vigilance. Rivals were always looking for an opportunity to undermine you, and a single mistake could have devastating consequences. Think of it as a high-stakes game of chess, where every move is carefully calculated, and every piece is expendable. The women of the harem were masters of deception, skilled at concealing their true intentions and manipulating others to their own ends. Key takeaway: power in the harem was a fluid and complex concept, influenced by a variety of factors, and constantly negotiated through social interactions and strategic maneuvering. Now that we've considered the dynamics of power and influence, let's delve into the challenges faced by the women in the harem. If you've ever felt isolated or alone, you can begin to imagine the experience of being confined to a single space, far from your family and familiar surroundings. Long before social media created echo chambers, the harem fostered an environment of limited perspectives and controlled information. The difference was that the stakes were much higher, and the consequences of dissent could be far more severe. Sure, there wasn't a confessional booth or a dramatic rose ceremony, but the emotional intensity was arguably just as high. When your alternative was a life of limited opportunities and social isolation,
The challenges of the harem suddenly seemed more manageable. One of the greatest challenges was the lack of autonomy. The women in the harem were subject to the pharaoh's will and the whims of the eunuchs and overseers. They had little control over their own lives and were expected to conform to the expectations of the court. Think of it as living under the constant surveillance of a micromanaging boss, but with no option to quit. Then there was the constant pressure to produce heirs. A woman's value in the harem was often determined by her ability to bear children, particularly sons. If you've ever felt the pressure to conform to societal expectations, you can understand the stress and anxiety that this must have caused. But what good are heirs without a little bit of hope? Despite the challenges, the women in the harem found ways to assert their agency and create meaning in their lives. They used their skills and talents to gain influence, forge connections, and express themselves creatively. They found solace in their friendships, shared their stories, and created their own culture within the walls of the harem. It was the ancient Egyptian equivalent of creating a support group, but instead of discussing personal issues, you're plotting political strategies. The harem was their world. Key takeaway. Despite the challenges and limitations, the women in the harem found ways to exercise agency, create meaning, and build communities within their confined world.
The stillness of the Egyptian night, broken only by the distant jackal's howl, finds you restless. Sleep evades you, perhaps because the weight of expectation is a heavy blanket. Tonight, we consider a role fraught with both peril and possibility, that of a concubine, specifically in the context of bearing the future. If you've ever felt the pressure of societal expectations, magnify that 1,000-fold. Your value in this world is intrinsically linked to your womb. Now, picture this situation. You are a woman in ancient Egypt, part of the pharaoh's or a nobleman's household, but not a principal wife. Your days are filled with duties, perhaps music, dance, or crafts. But your nights hold a different kind of significance. Bearing a son, that was the brass ring, wasn't it? Like winning the lottery, only the prize was a semblance of security and, perhaps, influence. What would you do, knowing your status hinged on this very personal, very precarious act? The legal and social distinctions were stark. Children born to a principal wife enjoyed a higher status. Think of it like this: the heir born to the CEO versus the heir born to, well, let's just say a very valued employee. The implications rippled through inheritance rights, social standing, and even the child's future prospects. But what good is a social stigma without the hope of overcoming it? Speaking of legal nuances, this brings us to the concept of legitimacy. The law wasn't always a rigid, unyielding force. There were avenues, albeit narrow ones, to improve a child's standing. Think of it as ancient Egyptian legal loopholes. Adoption, for example, could elevate a child born to a concubine. Or, if a concubine demonstrated exceptional loyalty or skill, she might even find herself elevated to a higher position, altering the legal landscape for her offspring. This wasn't common, mind you, but it was a possibility. A real-life rags-to-riches story, only with more linen and less washing. Motherhood, therefore, became a strategic endeavor. Some concubines, recognizing the precariousness of their position, actively sought to secure a better future for their children. This might involve cultivating alliances within the household, educating their children in valuable skills, or even strategically positioning them for advantageous marriages. Think of it as playing a very long game of chess with your child as the queen. From strategically placed lullabies to meticulously planned introductions, they leveraged every advantage they could find. But what about the emotional toll? The constant pressure, the inherent vulnerability, the knowledge that your child's future was so heavily dependent on your actions. It must have been immense. Imagine being solely responsible for your child's entire career path from infancy. Sure, modern parents feel pressure, but not quite like this. Key takeaway: motherhood for a concubine was not just about nurturing, it was about survival, for both herself and her child. Now that we've covered the complexities of legitimacy and social standing, let's talk about legacy. What did these women leave behind? Often their stories are obscured by the grand narratives of pharaohs and queens. Their voices are faint whispers in the historical record. But their impact, though perhaps less visible, was undeniable. Their sons and daughters went on to become scribes, priests, soldiers, even officials. They shaped Egyptian society in subtle but meaningful ways. Think of it as the ripple effect, where a small pebble creates waves that eventually reach the shore. From the grandest temples to the humblest homes, the children of concubines left their mark. Consider the potential for upward mobility. A talented son of a concubine, recognized for his intelligence and ambition, might rise through the ranks, achieving positions of influence and power. In this sense, their legacy extended far beyond their immediate family, shaping the course of Egyptian history. This wasn't always easy. It required resilience, ingenuity, and a healthy dose of luck. But it was possible. Speaking of luck, this brings us to the role of divine favor. Ancient Egyptians believed in the power of the gods. A concubine might seek the blessings of deities associated with childbirth and fertility, hoping to secure a healthy pregnancy and a successful birth. Think of it as covering all your bases, religiously speaking. Prayers, offerings, and rituals played an integral part in their lives, offering solace and a sense of control in a world where they often had very little. But what good is divine favor without a little earthly cunning? The difference between then and now? Today we have baby showers. Back then it was carefully worded prayers and offerings to deities, all while hoping the pharaoh had eaten enough grapes that day to keep him in a good mood. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but when your alternative was the whims of fate, any advantage, divine or otherwise, was worth pursuing. Key takeaway: the legacy of concubines lies not just in their offspring, but in their resilience, resourcefulness, and unwavering determination to secure a better future.
The flickering candlelight casts long shadows, doesn't it? What stories these walls could tell, if only they had voices beyond the rustling of linen and the soft whispers of the night. We've journeyed together through bustling markets and royal courts, but now, in this final chapter, we find ourselves contemplating something perhaps more profound, the sands of time and what they bury. If you've ever watched a sandcastle crumble under the relentless tide, you have a small glimpse into the fate of many who dwelled within the ancient Egyptian harems. Some rose to prominence, their names etched into the annals of history. Others, well, their stories faded like whispers in the desert wind. Think of them as the medieval equivalent of deleted social media profiles. There's a record somewhere, but good luck finding it. The reality for most concubines was a life of service, beauty, and perhaps a fleeting moment in the sun. But what happened when their beauty faded? What happened when the pharaoh's eye moved on? The answer, often, was a quiet descent into obscurity. It's a bit like being a one-hit wonder in the ancient world. You have your moment, your name is known, but then, back to the chorus line. Now that we've considered the ephemeral nature of favor, let's talk about those who defied it, the exceptional women who managed to carve their names into the stone of history. Some, through their intelligence, wit, or sheer force of personality, became trusted advisors, wielding influence far beyond the confines of their chambers. Imagine them as the ancient Egyptian version of savvy political strategists, except, with a lot more eyeliner. Speaking of influence, some even managed to secure the succession of their sons, guaranteeing not only their own continued status, but also shaping the future of Egypt itself. The difference between a queen and a concubine in ancient Egypt could be as thin as a strand of papyrus thread. Some navigated that precarious space with incredible skill and a ruthless pragmatism. Of course, it wasn't all power struggles. Many found solace in friendships, in shared experiences, and in the small acts of rebellion against the rigid structure of their lives. Like forming a book club, but with gossip about the pharaoh instead of literary criticism. Key takeaway: time, like the Nile, both sustains and erodes, leaving behind only fragments of lives lived. But what good is examining the fates of individuals without considering the broader context of the harem system itself? It was undeniably a tool of power, a way for the pharaoh to consolidate alliances, demonstrate his wealth, and ensure the continuation of his lineage. In a way, it was a brutal but effective form of ancient diplomacy. The difference was that the diplomats had little say in the matter. From the acquisition of women from conquered lands to the carefully orchestrated rituals of the royal bedchamber, the harem was a complex and multifaceted institution. It reveals much about the ancient Egyptian understanding of gender roles, power dynamics, and the very nature of kingship. It's like a really elaborate game of chess, where the pieces are people and the stakes are the throne. But what if the chess pieces started having their own ideas about how the game should be played? Speaking of which, the harem was a microcosm of Egyptian society,
with its own hierarchies, rivalries, and even its own forms of social mobility. While some women were born into servitude, others were brought in from noble families, each vying for the pharaoh's attention and favor. It's like a reality TV show, but with significantly higher stakes and less spray tan. And what did these lives reveal about ancient Egyptian culture as a whole? The emphasis on beauty, the importance of lineage, the pervasive influence of religion, all of these aspects of Egyptian society are reflected in the lives of the women within the harem. They were both products and agents of their culture, their stories intertwined with the grand narrative of ancient Egypt. Sure, it wasn't perfect. When your alternative was constant warfare and starvation, a gilded cage suddenly looked pretty appealing. Key takeaway: the harem was not just a collection of women, but a complex social institution that reflected and shaped ancient Egyptian society. Now that we've explored the dynamics of the harem, let's consider the enduring fascination with these women. Why do we still find ourselves drawn to their stories centuries after their lives ended? Perhaps it is the allure of the exotic, the mystery surrounding their lives, or the sheer drama of their circumstances. Or maybe it is the uncomfortable questions they raise about power, gender, and the human cost of ambition. Imagine the movie rights to these stories. If you've ever binge-watched a historical drama, you know the appeal. We project our own hopes, fears, and desires onto these figures from the past, searching for meaning and relevance in their experiences. It's a bit like looking into a distorted mirror, seeing both familiar and foreign reflections. Long before Netflix, people found stories to be endlessly fascinating. But what good is romanticizing the past without acknowledging the harsh realities of these women's lives? Their stories are not just tales of romance and intrigue. They are also stories of exploitation, oppression, and the denial of basic human rights. It's important to remember that behind the shimmering facade of the harem lay a system of power that often marginalized and silenced women. Just because it was a long time ago doesn't make it okay. From the limited freedoms they possessed to the constant surveillance they endured, the lives of concubines were far from idyllic. Their experiences offer a valuable perspective on the challenges faced by women in ancient Egypt and the ways in which power could be used to control and oppress. The difference was that these women often had no recourse, no way to challenge the system that confined them. Imagine trying to unionize a harem. Key takeaway: our fascination with the harem must be tempered with an understanding of the real-life constraints and injustices faced by the women who lived within its walls. As we reach the end of our journey, it's time to reflect on what their lives truly mean. What can we learn from them? The answer is that their stories, though fragmented and often obscured, offer valuable insights into the complexities of ancient Egyptian culture. They reveal the enduring power of human resilience, the importance of female agency, and the ongoing struggle for equality and justice. It's a reminder that even in the most oppressive of circumstances, individuals can find ways to assert their humanity, to connect with others, and to leave their mark on the world, however small. Like a single flower blooming in the desert, their stories remind us of the enduring power of life and hope.
But what if the desert flower actually had a secret weapon, like, say, knowledge of the pharaoh's deepest secrets? And now, as the first hint of dawn begins to paint the sky with a pale glow, our time draws to a close. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the sands of time, through the lives of these forgotten women. May their stories stay with you, a gentle reminder of the past and a source of inspiration for the future. Sweet dreams, friend.
The flickering lamplight dances on the papyrus scrolls, painting shadows that whisper secrets in the quiet hours. You find yourself pondering a life far removed from our own, a life where beauty was both currency and cage, the life of an Egyptian concubine. But what if that cage had hidden doors? What if beauty was merely the first step on a path to influence? Long before reality television and influencer culture, where appearances reigned supreme, the women within the pharaoh's harem navigated a complex social landscape. It was a world of carefully cultivated alliances, subtle manipulations, and the occasional brazen act of defiance. Think of it like a medieval housewives franchise, only with considerably higher stakes and the ever-present threat of, well, you know, crocodiles. Now, let's dispel a common misconception. Concubines weren't simply ornamental objects. While physical attractiveness was undoubtedly a factor, intelligence, wit, and resourcefulness were equally valued. After all, a pretty face can only hold a king's attention for so long. A sharp mind, however, could secure a dynasty. Speaking of sharp minds, imagine Cleopatra rolling her eyes at someone suggesting her intellect was secondary to her looks. "Honey," she'd probably say, "I built an empire. You're worried about my eyeliner?" The avenues for influence were varied. Some concubines became trusted advisors, offering counsel on matters of state. Their proximity to the pharaoh granted them unique insights and opportunities to shape his decisions. Others excelled at diplomacy, forging alliances with foreign powers through carefully crafted letters and strategic gifts. Think of them as the original international negotiators, only instead of power suits, they wore linen and ankhs. But what good is influence without the means to wield it? Many concubines amassed considerable wealth through gifts from the pharaoh or through their own entrepreneurial endeavors. They invested in land, traded in luxury goods, and even funded charitable projects. Basically, they were the ancient Egyptian equivalent of venture capitalists, only with a slightly higher chance of being buried alive with the king. Speaking of family, imagine the anxiety of a concubine hoping to improve her family's lot, securing advantageous marriages for siblings, advocating for their advancement within the bureaucracy, or simply ensuring their financial well-being were all ways to leverage their position. It was a delicate balancing act, requiring a keen understanding of court politics and a willingness to take risks. Imagine trying to get your brother-in-law a promotion while simultaneously avoiding the jealous whispers of other harem members. Talk about a stressful job. Furthermore, some concubines dedicated their resources to supporting temples, sponsoring religious festivals, and commissioning works of art. By aligning themselves with the powerful priesthood, they could further enhance their influence and solidify their legacy. It was a shrewd move, demonstrating both piety and political savvy. Key takeaway: influence was a currency to be invested wisely.
Now that we've covered the avenues of influence, let's delve into the specific examples. History whispers tales of women like Tia, the great royal wife of Amenhotep III. While not technically a concubine, her rise to power from relatively humble origins illustrates the possibilities for women of exceptional intellect and ambition. Her influence extended far beyond the bedroom, impacting foreign policy and religious reforms. It's likely she had a hand in promoting the Aten cult, which, safe to say, ruffled a few feathers among the traditional priesthood. Similarly, we can glean insights from the stories of other royal women whose power stemmed not just from their beauty, but from their shrewdness and political acumen. These women understood that survival in the royal court depended on more than just pleasing the king. They had to navigate treacherous alliances, anticipate rivals' moves, and be prepared to defend their position with unwavering resolve. It was a constant game of chess, played on a board where the stakes were life and death. Think of it as Game of Thrones, but with more sand and fewer dragons. Speaking of games, the court was also a place for the latest fashions, art, and literature, offering a concubine influence in the cultural sphere. Setting trends, supporting artisans, and even commissioning literary works were ways to leave their mark on society. This was especially true with music and dance. Imagine a concubine suggesting a new song to play at the next celebration. It would give her an incredible boost to popularity. But what good is power if you can't use it for good? Some concubines are believed to have used their influence to advocate for the vulnerable, pleading for clemency on behalf of prisoners, or providing aid to the poor. These acts of kindness, while often discreet, could have a profound impact on the lives of ordinary Egyptians. Sure, helping others was admirable, but imagine the satisfaction of knowing you'd just stuck it to a particularly nasty court official by quietly undermining his authority. From foreign policy to religious reform to supporting the arts and defending the vulnerable, the possibilities were immense. While their lives were undeniably constrained by the societal expectations of their time, they found ways to carve out spaces for themselves and exert their influence on the world around them. This is not to diminish the very real limitations and injustices they faced, but rather to recognize their resilience, their intelligence, and their ability to navigate a complex and often dangerous environment. Ever wonder what the modern equivalent is? Perhaps it's philanthropic endeavors by celebrities. A wealthy individual or a popular figure using their platform and resources to support a cause they are passionate about.
A concubine's patronage of the arts or support of a temple could be seen as an early form of this type of cultural influence. The difference lies in the context of power and social structure. Sure, it wasn't a perfect system, and abuses were rampant, but when your alternative was starvation, the system gave you a chance. Here's the thing. History is rarely black and white. The lives of Egyptian concubines were a tapestry woven with threads of beauty, power, vulnerability, and ambition. While their stories may be fragmented and obscured by the sands of time, they offer us a glimpse into a world where women, even those seemingly confined by their circumstances, found ways to leave their mark on history. Get this, their actions were not just about their own survival, but about shaping the future of their families, their communities, and even their nation. Key takeaway: the potential for influence existed even within the most restrictive environments.